local rich people or notables could become justices of the peace, and they had the authority basically to hold people in the jail who were arrested by either the town watch or by private actors. They had summary power to impose punishments, but not capital punishment, but many punishments, including forms of flogging or being put in the pillory, or the many lesser penalties that were available. So they were very powerful, and they could use the criminal law essentially as their personal toolkit to manage local relations, and that's just what they did. They could also, of course, keep you in the jail on a capital charge. But then they had to await the quarterly assizes, as they were called, which were the seasonal meetings of the King's Bench courts, usually in the largest town in sort of a shire, or rather large, maybe county-like area in our terms, where the King's Bench judges, who really were part of the elite, the national elite, not just the local elite, would come to town and preside over traditional jury trials, which could issue capital sentences. Those are the guys that put the black caps on their head, as we talked about last time. And finally, as we have talked about, there's a vast system of royal pardons here. Despite the name, the king doesn't have to be bothered every time, although the king did get sometimes involved in pardons. In fact, every judge, essentially because they were a minister of the king, could issue their own pardon. So it'd be typical, for instance, for a judge to hand out 16 capital sentences during one of these assizes, and then maybe on Friday, and then on Sunday, before he rode out of town, he would pardon 14 or 15 of them, leaving just a handful, perhaps, to meet the fate on the scaffold, or perhaps their family would be able to get a pardon before the next sitting of the court, which would also be the time of their execution. So what the Warwick School historians argue, especially Douglas Hayes' brilliant essay that begins Albion's Fatal Tree, is that it was deft use of this seemingly archaic and reactionary and clunky criminal legal system that allowed the English ruling class to manage this otherwise very dangerous and destabilized situation without reliance on an expensive and potentially tyrannical police force or private prison system. So there's sort of a number of features of this that are, again, nicely treated by Hay, and I'm just going to give you a flavor of them. First, there's the role of the criminal law in expressing a sense of majesty. After all, the king can't be everywhere all the time and doesn't have television to come into your homes or radio in this era, but through the courts, and especially these seasonal sittings of the assize King's Bench trials, the king's majesty could be brought to every corner of the kingdom. And when one of these seasonal sittings happened, and they'd happen typically 4 times a year, obviously if you were in London, it was a different system, and there were more regular sittings of the court. But if you were in a provincial area, and after all, 95% of the population of England still lived in these tiny villages and spread across the whole country, this would be the occasion where you really feel a little taste of the splendor of the throne. Right now, you get that by turning on TV and watching about the royals or reading the newspaper, etc. But for this period, this was how ordinary people got a flavor of the majesty. And this cartoon from the period depicts sort of the local elite, who are by London standards obviously lumpily unattractive and not very smooth or fashionable, kind of gearing up for the assize ball, as they would call it. There'd be a big festive party thrown for the King's Bench judges when they came to town, and essentially the local country squires and their wives and daughters and sons would gather and party with these representatives of the King's elite. And then, nicely dovetailed, of course, is the trial of capital defendants and then the executions of people who had been sentenced at a previous SCs and who had not been pardoned. So this is kind of what comes, as we're going to see in a moment, a kind of bundle of majesty combined with terror, combined with some elements of mercy and kindness. Very important to the way that the criminal law was able to help maintain hegemony in Hanoverian England was the theme of justice. This is something that's much debated even to this day by historians, is just how equal and just this legal system could be considered. There's a quote from an anti-French Revolution pamphlet, sort of expressing, I think, very directly this notion: we have long enjoyed that liberty and equality which the French have been struggling for. In England, we've enjoyed it. All men are equal. All commit the same offenses. All who commit the same offenses are liable to the same punishments. If the very poorest and meanest man commits murder, his hanging with a hempen halter, just a rope, and his body dissected, and the same fate awaits a rich man. Right? Now, this was a very appealing image to English people, that they belonged to, unlike the other Europeans, they belonged to a legal system that treated them fairly and equally. The hanging rope, the hempen halter, was actually a powerful symbol of this, in part because they actually did hang some rich people, like Lord Ferrer, in part because the very fact that it was the same means of execution differentiated England from the continent, because on the continent, aristocrats got their own special means of execution, usually a beheading, a quick beheading, rather than strangulation or a more painful death. So there was a kind of status distinction in how you died. England didn't believe in that. Now, you might imagine that is a fairly thin kind of privilege. You get to die just like the rich do. And of course, if you put this together with the fact that the vast majority of people swinging at Tyburn and similar places were guilty of property crimes, not of murder, then we can say it may be in fact true that if you were a rich guy and you committed a murder, there was at least a chance you were going to go to the gallows. But the reality is, most people went to the gallows for property crimes, and you had no reason to ever commit a property crime. I mean, you threw out more food than the people, many of the poor people in your community would have needed to eat for a month. So this equality of the law is obviously a very questionable thing, but it had a powerful resonance, and it had historical features like the English Bill of Rights, which had been negotiated between the king and aristocrats in 1689, but quickly became extended to all English men, at least. I don't think women really got the benefit of that, at least until the 20th century. So justice is a big part of this notion of equality. As I said, terror, and we talked about this a lot, the undeniable potential of these kinds of scenes to terrorize a population. And this is something very much on the minds of English rulers who believe that, especially the kind of deracinated population that has been pushed out of the countryside and sort of gathering in the large cities as a kind of a les mis, kind of dangerous class, needs terror in order to keep them in their place, because they don't have the kind of traditional relations they once had to local landlords, the church, etc. So there's a real sense of terror that it has to be used at certain crimes. Piracy, both of these are scenes of pirates. There's actually there was a special wharf in London where they would hang pirates, so it was actually a different place than Tyburn if you were a pirate. Obviously, piracy is a very serious crime even today, but the same terror awaited many whose crimes were not serious in a generic sense, but were viewed as threatening by the ruling classes. So if you engaged in essentially acts of vandalism aimed at expressing resentment at some of these local property owners that had kicked all your relatives off the land, maybe you broke into their deer park and killed a bunch of deer or let them escape, maybe you destroyed their fish pond, because they have walled parks basically as part of their estates, you could easily hang for a crime like that. So terror is a big part of that. And interesting in this regard, Peter Linebow provides some wonderful examples from 18th century canting dictionaries, and canting is slang expressions. And these are some of the expressions for a hanging day is a hanging match, a collar day, the sheriff's ball, a hanging affair, Paddington Fair. I don't know quite how they got some of these. To hang was to swing, to dance the Paddington Frisk, to Morris, to go west, to ride up Holborn Hill. To be hanged was to be jammed. This is one of my favorite. From a gemmed collared, noosed, scragged, twisted, nubbed, backed, stretched, trined, cheated, crapped, tucked up, or turned off. There's over 100 different slang expressions for hanging, basically. The only word in the 18th century, the only thing in the 18th century that had more slang expressions was money. So just for a moment, what are we to take from this? We're talking about the terror of hanging, but these terms are a little bit humorous. And in fact, it will amuse you perhaps to know that many of these terms were also used for being married, for getting married, get nubbed, backed, etc., stretched. Does this kind of canting suggest that that hanging didn't hold much terror for the English working class that might be threatened with the scaffold? Something that they're kind of laughing off over a couple of pints and talking about a Paddington Fair, or went down to watch so-and-so dance the Morris? What is it? What do you take from that? Is it a sign that they were pretty unconcerned about it? Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that really takes pretty sophisticated answers to this, but the possible answer would be that maybe it is clear that causes them to avoid direct mentioning of the prosecuted, of the process actually referred to in more humorous terms, because that'll be often a mechanism of avoiding fear.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point. I mean, humor is one way we have of essentially trying to master things that are essentially unmasterable, like death, right? It's the whole notion of black humor is, you faced with a great illness, faced with difficult circumstances, people often turn to humor. So, and one thing that sort of these wonderfully well-worked terms tell us is that people thought a lot about hanging, right? They saw people hanged, I should say. Meat is hung, people are hanged. I remind myself of that occasion. They saw it, they thought about it, right? People sat around and they were engaged in activities that could get them trined. They thought about it, they talked to people. You had time in the jail thinking that you might be in the next hanging and then get spared, right? So you're circulating back out in the world and sharing these terms. So there's a sense here, I think it doesn't prove conclusively that the people were genuinely terrorized by this, but it suggests that it got their attention, that was very much on their minds, that it wove itself into the culture in this way. But ironically, while we look at the high pardon rate and say, well, they didn't terrorize nearly as much as they could have, part of what Hay argues is that the deft use of terror is actually made more powerful by the precise use of mercy at the right time. You just kind of hang everybody. You become Sir Stalin and start massacring people. For one thing, you may genuinely push people to the point where you get rebellion on your hands, but also you kind of lose the ability to modulate the level of terror to respond to threats. If you're sort of like Vlad the Impaler, everybody gets the same very harsh treatment. Again, you're losing the ability to try to send a message more than just to terrorize. And that's where this notion of mercy comes in. And it's not just that it provided great ideological fodder when a great lord would intervene on behalf of one of his servants who had gotten themselves, in the jail over a theft of some sort and was now facing a possible hanging day. It created a vast kind of market for lower class people to seek favors from upper class people, and therefore for upper class people to bank obligations among the people who ultimately they needed to have their back if there ever was a rebellion or a challenge to their authorities. After all of these rich people lived among thousands of people who had not a hundredth of their wealth and who often were faced with starvation and real threat. They really needed loyalty and not just fear, and that's what they got in many ways. This is a quote from a letter written to his landlords by William Sheffield, who was another country lad who found himself in the London jail facing a possible hanging day. He's awaiting his trial here, and he writes, I'm now going to a dreadful trial, and God knows, but my poor, he's impressive, he can write it all, actually, not that his spelling is bad, right? He's a laborer, and God knows, but my poor life may lie at stake. And he asked them if they would come and, quote, give me a character. They would be character witnesses for him. And of course, testifying in front of the jury that William was a good lad and had perhaps strayed into some difficulties, even if it didn't persuade the jury to spare a capital conviction, would become the first step in the appeal, right? Because for a pardon, not for a legal overturning, for a pardon, because the judge himself had the power to do that. And this is where also we can see a significant dimension of the way the class justice worked. Because while it's true that the vast majority of people to face capital crimes were poor, there were plenty of middling and richer people whose sons, especially, could get into a bit of trouble, right? Try to come back from your gambling debts by pulling off a bold highway robbery, and suddenly find yourself in the jail. And here's where the system could essentially really take class into account, right? You're not going to let the local earl's son swing over a minor matter like that. Nobody was hurt, etc. Because he doesn't really pose a threat to money and property. But if that had been done by the horse tenderer's son, then it would be a whole different matter. And it leaves in place the idea that, well, if he murdered somebody like Lord Frere, then he would die. Nobody's really counting how many of these aristocrats and their sons, or wealthy merchants and their sons, do get essentially off the hook. So the royal power of pardon is really what appears to be the most archaic part of the whole English system. And what, from Beccaриa's point of view and Bentham's, is a scandal, right? Because it undercuts the deterrent value of the law, is for the Warwick historians the real genius of this system as a tool of hegemony and class social control. Of course, it had its defenders. And indeed, I think the prevailing view by many historians and criminologists has been that the English pardon system was a useful and necessary restraint on an otherwise very punitive and violent system. And perhaps the classic rationalization of it is given by Blackstone. He says, essentially, the beauty of the whole system is that this way the law can be relentlessly severe in its demands. We don't bend it just because somebody had lots of equitable considerations. Instead, we let the sovereign extend the act of mercy without having to lessen the rigor of the law. Now, as realists, we can't quite believe that because we think people pay attention to what happens and not just what the law says. And that's really where the Warwick School understanding of how these pardons aren't just singular acts, they're part of a whole tapestry of local loyalty and relations. And the final point that I want to make from their work is that it's not just the terror or the mercy wrapped in all that majesty and justice. It's the deft ability to use it intricately, right? Because what English ruling class had going for it is that it had this extensive local network of elites that were tied by relationship, blood, and loyalty to the king, but who really knew their local areas. Cities like London obviously posed a much bigger, different problem because of the anonymity and anonymity of the people who ended up there. But this kind of local knowledge meant that this ruling class could use its power very deftly to deploy just the right amount of terror. Let's say there had been, for instance, a food riot, which was not uncommon and was one of the things that they feared the most, right? When having forced everyone off the land and shipped all the grain to feed sheep for the market, or sold it overseas to foreign markets with better return, you're suddenly faced with starving peasants. Well, they didn't think of themselves as peasants, starving people that used to have rights to your fields. You could face a food riot. And what if there is a food riot? What are you going to do? Well, as the local JP, you're going to put some of those people in jail, all of them in jail to try to suppress the riot. Working with the King's Bench judge when he comes to town, you're going to choose one or two of these people to hang to make sure that the message gets out that even locals need to stay in their place and have to await charity and not try to use violence to address their starvation. And most will get a pardon, but only after they've worked all their connections up the hierarchy to get an extension of some kind of mercy. So it's a very precise system. And part of what you see is that it allows for quite a bit of control over the actual amount of executions. Partly, of course, it may be driven by the actual crime rate, although we have no independent way of measuring that. We look at the period 1776 to 1771, all the way until 1790. You get this period of very elevated capital convictions. This is a period of the American Revolution, and just afterwards, where there's, especially in the latter period, there's a lot of soldiers coming home, may end up in the jails. But in any event, you can see that there's strikingly different numbers of executions, and that reflects, maybe to some extent the rate of crime, but also the kind of specific needs of the system for a certain balance of terror. Now, before we leave this topic, I want to talk a little bit more about resistance, and especially these riots that seem to create the possibility of some pressure for change in the English execution ritual in the 18th and early 19th century. Now, executions, of course, as we've already discussed, were an inherently precarious event. Because the script depended on public participation, the public could always disappoint the script or even reverse it and attack the executioners or denounce the judges. Were acts of resistance common and full-scale riots common? The answer is almost certainly no. They were very occasional, very rare events. What is much debated is how important they were. For the Warwick historians, they're evidence that the system was generating a lot of resistance on the part of workers and their comrades and friends that were in jail, as well as serving an important role for the ruling class in maintaining power. But other historians have argued that they were part of just the general English reputation for riotous behavior and weren't seen as having a particularly radical or sort of power-threatening or challenging quality to them. But perhaps the question we ought to ask is sort of why there weren't more acts of resistance. After all, most of the people being hanged, were young, typically poor, hapless young men and young women who had done nothing worse than steal a piece of cloth or a silver spoon from their master or their landlord. Typically the crowd who would watch them swing would have been filled with their friends and neighbors. Why do you think there weren't more? I mean, I can't give you the quantitative data on riots, but I think there's general agreement that they were quite rare, and debate precisely about what to make of the few that did happen. But why do you think more didn't happen? What kept people standing in front of the gallows watching their loved ones and friends and neighbors hang for things that surely they must have felt were harsh, if not unjust, penalties? What do you think? What keeps the people in the crowd? It's once in a very, very long time that something happens. They'll tear down the scaffold, or these riots over the dissection became an important source of strife. But why not more often? What keeps people from challenging this? Talking will make you cooler. You will feel cooler. Yes, please.
I feel like they have a vested interest in that the system goes on, and so you don't, shoot yourself in the foot by
Do you think they bought into the idea that the system, while perhaps cruel at times, was somehow necessary to protect them as well, protect their property? So that's really been part of the ideology, right? That the poor person doesn't have very much property, but whatever they have is that much more important to them. And the fact that the noose is there to protect this, as well as the great man's mansion, is a potential sign of the equality of English justice. So there's some of that justice. What else keeps the crowd in place?
Yes, from a Russian perspective, you would say that the elite can make the small concessions to keep the poor masses happy, keep them happy, not to revolt, but keep them in the light.
And why? I mean, that's a good way to put it, because these people everybody has their limits, right? Their threshold where they start getting crazier after that point, right? Put up with a certain amount. Like you're putting up with a certain amount today, right? Sitting here, it's hot. You'd rather be outside, right? And I can trade on that. I can talk gibberish for the next, say, what do I have, 24 minutes? I can talk gibberish for, say, the next 10 minutes, and I bet nobody would get up and leave the room. Maybe after 10 minutes, if I was just talking, in a complete string of nonsense syllables, somebody would be calling 911 or whatever, but people might start leaving the room. But the point is, whatever situation of power you're in, there's always a kind of threshold that you're going to just go with the flow, and then at a certain point you go, wait, that's it. Let's tear down the stairs, let's attack the professor, tear down the screen, whatever. There comes a point, right, that burn the chancellor's house down. People get to that point. So my question for you is, why would, in so many cases, and here's a dissection, right, which was the source of a lot of these riots, according to the historians. So it's okay to watch your Jimmy swing, for trying to steal a spoon from the house he worked in or whatever. But if the judges are going to insist on giving his body over to the surgeons to dissect, that's it. We're going to take a risk, because after all, rioting at the scene of execution is probably a capital crime itself. You could end up in the jail facing the same kind of sentence. Why do you think the line gets drawn there? Why were people able to accept watching their sons and daughters hang, but suddenly, like, you're going to dissect them? That's too much, right? I mean, I think for most of us, we'd draw the line somewhere closer to the death sentence, right? If we're going to rebel about anything, it might be like killing my kid. But yeah.
I feel like the number of capital crimes is so high, and the number of hanging becomes so normalized in a society that it was just okay, that's what they get, that's just a sentence, they do their time or whatever. But when it comes to something as crazy as dissections, I think that even if dissections became normal, people would stop writing after for those two. If it became something that was so widespread, we stop questioning the atrocity of it. Because look at the scene, it's disgusting, So I think maybe it has to
Now, the hoi polloi probably would not have gotten to see this scene. The scene would have been taking place inside either one of the royal colleges, in which you would have had to pay quite a bit of tuition to get in as a medical student, or the new private medical schools, which were beginning to do much. They actually needed more bodies because they wanted each student to be able to get their hands into a corpse and actually, as you would want a doctor that was treating you to have actually experimented, known anatomy, not just heard a lecture from somebody. Yeah.